You're listening to a 3CR podcast recorded in the 3CR community radio studio in Melbourne, Australia. If you like what you hear, please consider donating or subscribing so we can keep bringing you more independent community content. For more information, go to 3cr.org.au.
Slavery is back.
Welcome to a place where private business profit from a captive labour force, yet pennies are spent on medical services to a population in which the Indigenous, the poor and the mentally ill are overrepresented. Where isolation, humiliation and degradation are facts of life. Welcome to prison.
It depends who's telling the story, I suppose. The prisoners would have one view, the people who work in the prison system would have another, and I think it's up to people to decide where the truth is.
Give government propaganda and the media spin doctors the flick. And check out Doin Time for news, views and tunes on prison issues from Guantanamo Bay to Christmas Island to prisons and detention centres everywhere. Every Monday at 4 p.m. on your community radio 3CR.
We are still fired up and we're still talking about revolution.
Hello and welcome to the Doin Time show. This is 3CR Community Radio, 855 AM on the dial, streaming live on www.3cr.org.au. And a content warning that this episode of Doin Time contains audio images of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have died and discussion of deaths in custody. This is Marisa and I'll be with you for the next hour. Joining us on the show first up is Trinity Ford, President of People with Disability Australia, who will speak about the Queensland Government's trans health ban and what this means for trans and intersex young people with disability. Next, we will bring you an interview with David Glanz, one of the organisers of the Anti-Zionist Jewish rally, which took place on Sunday, 9th of February, to give a report back. After that, we will hear from Sarah Schwartz, Human Rights Law Centre's Legal Director, about the Albanese Government's mandatory minimum sentences, which are not the right tool to protect people and communities from acts of hate and racism. We will speak about the media release in detail and have a look at some of the broader issues. People with Disability Australia has strongly condemned the Queensland Government's decision to restrict access to gender-affirming care for trans and gender-diverse children and adolescents. Our first interview is Trinity Ford, President of People with Disability Australia, who will speak about the Queensland Government's trans health ban and what this means for trans and intersex young people with disability. Trinity Ford is a research and policy consultant and a training lawyer with 6 years' experience in the disability sector, including with the Disability Royal Commission. She is a proud neurodivergent trans woman with physical, neurological, psychosocial and sensory disabilities. PWDA has strongly condemned the Queensland Government's decision to restrict access to gender-affirming care for trans and gender-diverse children and adolescents. And I have had the pleasure of interviewing Trinity last year, actually on our last show, the 16th of December, about other disability issues. So I'm really happy to have her back on. Hello, Trinity, welcome.
Marisa, thank you so much for having me back on. I'm really excited.
It's lovely to have you. So am I. Now, Trinity, can you talk to us about what's been going on with this ban? I'd really like to hear all about it. Tell us.
Totally. I mean, it's heartbreaking. So the Queensland Government, or the Health Minister in particular, put out a statement a couple of weeks ago saying that they had some concerns about one clinic up in Cairns about the quality of gender-affirming care that it was giving to kids, and used that as a basis to ban all public system access to puberty blockers and HRT for everybody in Queensland under the age of 18 if they're doing it through the public system, which we know is for most people the only way that they can get it.
Absolutely. And actually, so this move prevents medical professionals from prescribing puberty blockers, is that right?
That's right. My understanding is that it can still happen privately, but that I was at some of the rallies. I was at the Sydney rally over on Saturday. There were 20 rallies around the country supporting young trans kids affected by this in Queensland. And some of the speakers there were saying that privately this costs something like $400 a month in some of the worst cases for parents to get their kids the care that they need outside the state system. So practically we're talking about a near total ban in Queensland.
So shouldn't medical professionals be looking at this rather than politicians? Isn't that really harmful?
Exactly, yeah, it's really harmful. And, it overlaps with a lot of the rhetoric that we're seeing around the world, especially in the US and the UK, politicising what's just a healthcare issue. That we've been doing this in Australia and a bunch of other countries, working out how to get kids with who are trans the kind of treatment and healthcare that they need. And the first-line treatment for that is just puberty blockers. All that does is buys families and these kids some more time to work out, what it is that they need and to sort of explore their gender socially before going through a bunch of changes in their body. I mean, I think often people are a little bit scared at the idea of somebody starting cross-sex hormones and developing different secondary sex characteristics. But that's what puberty is as well. So, I mean, if you're forcing a kid to go through a puberty that doesn't align with their body, it's such a heart-wrenching, awful thing to go through, particularly if you're the kid saying, hey, I don't want to do this, there's a medicine that I could have that would buy me more time. It's awful.
Just out of look, I don't know, maybe I'm being a little bit... I just wanted to ask you, was this decision made after Trump came into power in America?
Yeah, 100%.
Oh,
yeah. It was like
I didn't want to ask
after.
that question. Yeah. I'm not surprised.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, Queensland Government did a review of gender-affirming care across Queensland just last year, and it came back saying, hey, everything's looking really quite good. Please fund the system more so that we can actually get the doctors who are doing good work, doing it to more kids and more patients, getting kids health care. But, the new government didn't like that, so they needed a reason to shelve that report. And, so now they're doing their own new one, which that's why I say, they reckon that it's a pause on health care, but, it's just until they can get a report back, and who knows what that's going to say.
It really does beg a belief, doesn't it, Trinity? And can you tell us a little bit about what lived experience from your perspective you can talk about here?
Yeah. I transitioned as an adult because I didn't have the kind of resources available to understand that I was trans and what that meant, and that there were options available for me. If I could have gone on puberty blockers as a kid, that would have saved me so much distress. I've got heartbreaking memories of crying with my mum, saying that, I didn't like what was happening to my body. And if I could have just put all of that on pause and had some time to work it out, and then, when it was the right time, start estrogen therapy, that would have been life-changing. And it's wonderful that I've been able to access that now as an adult, but, I lost my girlhood as a result of it. And, I still grieve that.
Absolutely. And that grief is valid, just like any other grief, whatever Trump may say.
Yeah. And you mentioned Trump. It's interesting, the kind of people that he's been going after and that they're going after here, it's always they come for the kids first, the disabled people first, and the people who are in prison and, immigration detention and all of those settings, because these are the people who it's already seen as okay in our society to take away their rights and make decisions for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I'm grateful that you've come onto the show to talk about this. And for me, the reason why I invited you onto the show was to really highlight to listeners that not only is the Doin Time show a safe environment where all communities can come together and talk about things in safety, but also that I wanted to really look at how the interconnection with prisons, and also disability as well.
It's a really interesting one. I mean, I don't know what's happening to all these poor kids who are locked back up in Dondale and these other youth detention centres, but, I'm pretty confident that they're not getting, that the handful of trans ones who've been in and out of juvenile justice aren't getting, I mean, we know they're not getting health care. I'm pretty sure they're not getting gender-affirming health care, right?
No. And, of course, and we can discuss this for another show, but you also have prisoners that suffer, who are transgender because they're going into, the male or female prison, and there's nothing for transgender people.
Exactly. And, there's sexual violence risks for both of those if you've got a binary trans person. It's literally sticking a woman in a man's prison. It's a huge sexual violence risk. And, I mean, even as part of Trump's executive order, he's sort of suspended the operation of the Prison Rape Abolition Act, which is telling. It's the state creating the conditions by which we can be persecuted and subjected to hate crimes.
Indeed. And an injury to one is an injury to all. Exactly. Gender-affirming care is essential health care, and leading health organisations, including the Australian Medical Association and the Royal Australian College of Physicians, support access to gender-affirming treatments, don't they?
That's right, as well as the Australian Endocrine Society and the Psychiatrists Guild, whatever they're called. We've been dealing with trans kids in our health systems for, 70 years or something. We've been doing this for a long time. We've got a really good body of evidence. It's just that now there's more kids who are able to come out and be trans that, it's an easy target for a moral panic.
It's approximately 4:12 and you're listening to an interview with Trinity Ford, President of People with Disability Australia. And just a quick reminder to listeners that it is subscriber drive, and what that means is that we really need subscribers to financially support 3CR, $80 for waged and $40 for unwaged. Go online or ring now, 9419 8377 to subscribe. Why do you think that people or listeners should subscribe to the show, Trinity?
Well, I mean, it's so important to support community radio. These are the kind of voices that we need to have a platform and to share our voices. The mainstream media is important, but the kind of incredible work that you guys are doing here on community radio is just as or more important.
Trinity, thank you so much for coming onto the program. I'd like to talk to you about this in detail sometime later on in the year, or even in about a month or so. But are there any final comments that you wanted to make?
Just please get on the phones to your politicians if you can. It's trans kids up in Queensland and across this country really need our support. They're so vulnerable, and we've got to show up for them. But thanks for having me, Marisa.
Lovely to have you. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. And that was Trinity Ford, who is the President of People with Disability Australia, speaking about the fact that healthcare does not include transgender people. There's been a ban imposed in Queensland.
Like so many community organisations, we need your continued financial support to keep 3CR on air and our community connected and strong.
Consider selecting Auto Renew for your subscription so your subscription keeps rolling on every year.
We love the security of knowing we have your support into the future.
Head to 3cr.org.au or call 9419 8377 and remember to select recurring for your annual subscription.
And in case you've just tuned in, this is the Doin Time show, and it's approximately 4:14 and it's subscriber drive. And we're going to be speaking now with David Glanz, And I just wanted to read out the intro very quickly. Anti-Zionist Jews and supporters rallied yesterday against the genocide in Gaza on Sunday despite a threatened counter-protest by far-right supporters of Israel. They demanded that the Australian government stop weaponising allegations of anti-Semitism as a fig leaf for its support for Israel. The event was organised by an autonomous group of Jewish activists. The rally heard from Indigenous, Palestinian and Jewish speakers to emphasise the need to stand against all forms of racism, including anti-Semitism, Islamophobia and discrimination against First Nations people. Joining us on the line is David Glanz, and I'd like to welcome him to talk about this. Hello, David. Welcome.
Hi, Marisa. How are you?
Good, thanks. Lovely to have you. Now, tell us about what happened yesterday, and I'd really love for you to give a report back on the rally, some of the speakers, and just give a little bit of background.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the background is that a number of who are Palestinian supporters but are Jewish have been really concerned about the way that the government, the opposition, big sections of the media have been talking up the level of anti-Semitism in society, and there certainly is some, but they've been talking it up not in order to stand against racism, but in order to punish and attack the Palestine movement. And there's been quite an argument that if there's any kind of anti-Semitic incident, it's because of the Palestine rally in the city, and those rallies are a danger both to Jews who go into the city and more generally. And we were just fed up with this. We thought, no, this is completely wrong. And at the end of the day, the best people to call out this story are Jews themselves. And that's why we organised the rally yesterday. In a nutshell, there was, including supporters, up to 400 people at our rally. There were about 50 people at the pro-Israel rally organised by a far-right Zionist group called the Lions of Zion. The police militarised the operation. I think it was very unfortunate. They basically barricaded off the entire top end of Bourke Street and the facade and the steps of Parliament, and kept us apart as if we were both equally troublesome. And that's something, as organisers, we really rejected. We were going to hold a peaceful rally. We wanted to hold it on the steps, and the police treated us and the supporters of genocide as being equal, which rankles. It was annoying, but we pressed on and we had a very good rally. We had 4 excellent speakers. We had 2 Jewish speakers, one Jacob Thacker, who is a comedian, but more importantly, a Jewish scholar. He's doing a master's degree in Jewish studies at Monash University, and he's a past president of the Jewish Student Society at Melbourne University. So he's been right in the thick of student organising, but as an anti-Zionist. And the other Jewish speaker was Jeffrey Lowenstein. And a lot of readers will go, Lowenstein, where do I know that name from? And actually his son is Anthony Lowenstein, the writer and documentary maker. But Jeffrey himself has a very distinguished career of standing up for human rights. He's a barrister, but he's also been right at the heart of the Jewish community, both on the Jewish Community Council of Victoria and on the Anti-Defamation League. So when he speaks against genocide and when he speaks up against Israel, he carries a lot of weight. And then we had May Saif from Free Palestine Melbourne, who is the amazing Palestinian woman that many listeners will have seen in action at the rallies over the last 16 months. And we had a First Nations woman, Debbie Morgan-Frail, who used to work for the Australian Education Union, is a proud Wiradjuri woman from central New South Wales. And they all brought different elements to the proceedings, but all fed in that direction. Firstly, we reject racism in all its forms, and secondly, we reject the way in which so many in the Australian ruling class are using the idea of anti-Semitism as a stick to beat the Palestine movement.
Of particular concern, and I was just having a look at the media release here, is the fact that Australian and state governments have seized on tragic but isolated acts of anti-Semitism to create a narrative that Jews in Melbourne are living in fear.
Yeah, well, we said, and in the sense we proved, that's complete nonsense. For a start, and this is a stick that's been used to beat the weekly rallies. Every single weekly rally since October 2023, they haven't been going on quite that long. Since October 2023, Jews have participated in the rallies, the Palestine rallies. At many of those rallies, Jews have been on the speaking platform. And in fact, Geordie Silverstein from the Loud Jew Collective was one of the speakers at the main Palestine rally yesterday. It's simply not true that Jews are in danger because of the Palestine rally. Yeah. And ironically, not only because we turned up in numbers yesterday, but because our opponents turned up in far fewer numbers, that was further proof that actually it's not the case that Jews are unable to come into the city. It's a complete and utter furphy. But one thing I think that's worth noting, and this is something for the future, Marisa, to sort of build into all our thinking, is that there is going to be a new round of legislation coming from the Jacinta Allen state Labor government, which will impose restrictions on elements of our right to protest. And there's a coalition come together called the Defend Dissent Coalition, which has called a rally outside Parliament on Wednesday, March the 19th, 5:30. It's a sitting Parliament day to protest against this proposed law, which would include, for instance, the banning of masks on rallies. Jacinta Allen actually said that's so people cannot defend themselves from capsicum spray. There's also the idea that there would be a ban on rallies around places of worship. Well, if you are somebody who wanted to protest against the Catholic Church and George Pell over the appalling, rate of child sexual abuse by Catholic priests, you would become a criminal if you stood outside a church or a cathedral to make that point under the new law. So I know we're jumping ahead of ourselves.
No, but this is relevant. Yep.
Yeah, because the starting point for Jacinta Allen is basically to say we are unsafe because of the pro-Palestine movement. And that is wrong, that is dishonest, and it is being used as a way of attacking all of us.
Well, that's right. I mean, people are saying, a lot of, right-wingers and fascists, they're trying to say that demonise Palestine and also make Australia a very unsafe place to be with their antics. And I think for me, what I'm really concerned about as well is the way the police powers are going to have far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely, and we already know that the level of police powers and the level of the militarisation of the police is at very scary levels. The Melbourne Activist Legal Service, MALS, has brought out a report on the police riot, that's my term, not theirs, but the police riot against protesters at Land Forces, the Land Forces Expo a few months ago, the Disrupt Land Forces protesters, and it is absolutely scary how many weapons the police have at their disposal. And those of us who were there at that particular rally know how unprovoked the massive police attack was. So they already have the weapons, they already have the powers, and Jacinta Allen wants to add to that. They will be able to stop any vehicle on suspicion, which basically might mean they don't like the look of you, on suspicion that you are heading to a rally and you have locks or rope or glue in your car. Now, I can think of lots of legitimate reasons why those things would be in someone's car, but if they think you look a bit sus, under this new law, they would be able to pull you over, arrest you for possession, and then seize those items. And you wonder, how much more power does the police need?
Yeah. It really is disgusting. And it also really looking at the fact that even though the pandemic is over, the coronavirus is still alive and well. And what about vulnerable people, people with disability, or people who are immune compromised that are still wearing masks? How are they going to look at that?
Well, she gave a media conference, and it was on the 17th of December. So a lot of people were already in sort of shutdown mode and
of course
concentrating on their Christmas shopping. So a lot of this sort of passed people by. There was a hint there would be some kind of, exemption. But how does a police officer know if they're looking at you or me in a crowd and we're wearing a mask? How do they know if we're breaking the law or we are a legitimate exemption? I'll tell you what they'll do. They'll arrest first and ask questions later.
Exactly.
So people who have to wear masks because for health reasons will find it more challenging to go to rallies. Now, this law hasn't even been tabled in Parliament yet, let alone passed. And obviously, people are hoping that we will kill this law off before it becomes law, that we'll kill off the bill before it becomes law. So people shouldn't panic. This isn't the law today or tomorrow, but it is a reason to get outside Parliament on March the 19th.
And also looking at the criminalisation of the weekly solidarity rallies for Palestine by falsely linking them with the firebombing of the Adass Israel synagogue.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's disgraceful. The police themselves are now sort of heavily hinting that a number of these anti-Semitic attacks, and clearly the firebombing of a synagogue is an anti-Semitic attack, no ifs, no buts, but so is the firebombing of a minibus belonging to a Muslim school. That's a racist act. The attack, the firebombing of a youth belonging to a Palestinian living in Newport. The media and the politicians are very selective. They pick on the anti-Semitic attacks, and they have basically ignored more than 1,000 attacks on Muslims since October the 7th. But when they look at that attack, even the police are saying, well, it could be somebody, and I don't know who that somebody is, paying local crims, non-political crims, to do some of these acts. And there have been arrests, particularly in New South Wales, around some of the attacks on Jewish buildings, swastikas and the like, all of which is despicable and I condemn utterly. And they've all been, to be honest, petty crims. Exactly. No one from the Palestine movement, no one from the left has been arrested in connection with these events.
Exactly.
But Jacinta Allen and her like still come back and try and create a link between being on the streets for Palestine and the anti-Semitic attacks. One of the things, if I can just add this, that I said yesterday at the rally, is that the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is one of those who's been saying that the Palestine movement in Australia is leading to anti-Semitic attacks. He went to the US last week and he made a point of meeting and shaking hands with Elon Musk. Now, Elon Musk has publicly supported Nazis in Britain and Germany, and infamously through the Nazi salute at Trump's inauguration. He spreads anti-Semitic lies about the role of the financier George Soros. He is on the far right. No ifs, no buts. But Netanyahu greets them as a friend of Israel. So I think you've got to say, which side do you want to be on? Do you want to be on the side of Israel even when it's backed by Nazis, or do you want to be on the side of those fighting against racism and against genocide? And the Jews who organised yesterday's rally said, we are on the side of anti-racism. We stand with our Palestinian brothers and sisters against apartheid and ethnic cleansing because they are not the enemy.
It really is filthy media where people are having a go at prominent, beautiful Jewish figures, you know, that are addressing violations of human rights. And, you know, there's actually a really amazing, I love this comment in the media release before we finish. Instead of slandering pro-Palestine activists, the Australian government should be sanctioning Israel and joining South Africa in its case before the International Court of Justice.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And in some ways, the media release has been overtaken by events because since it was released, Trump has come out with his plan for ethnic cleansing of Gaza, the total ethnic cleansing of Gaza, which is what so many people in Israel have been pushing for a long time. And what does Anthony Albanese say? Actually nothing. He's tying himself in knots, desperately trying not to offend anybody, including Donald Trump. So,
exactly. So look, I'm hoping to interview Debbie, the Indigenous speaker, next week. I'm going to try and call her again. But it's really great that you were able to include her, in the rally as well. Not you, but, like all the activists.
Very powerful speaker, very knowledgeable.
Yeah, about deaths in custody and removal of Aboriginal children from their families, because there really is fantastic solidarity between, Indigenous movements and the movements of Palestine.
Absolutely.
David, thank you so much for coming onto the program. It was really lovely to have you, and I'm hoping we can have you back soon.
It's been a pleasure. Anytime, Marisa.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that was David Glanz, who was one of the organisers of the Anti-Zionist rally that happened yesterday at Parliament House.
Celebrate all that unites us and host your own Feast for Freedom this autumn. Cook delicious global recipes curated by refugees and our guest chefs, and come together with your friends, family and community while raising vital funds for people seeking asylum. Register now at feastforfreedom.org.au. The Asylum Seeker Resource Centre is a 3CR supporter. Celebrate all that unites us and host your own Feast for Freedom this autumn. Cook delicious global recipes curated by refugees and our guest chefs, and come together with your friends, family and community while raising vital funds for people seeking asylum. Register now at feastforfreedom.org.au. The Asylum Seeker Resource Centre is a 3CR supporter.
Stand in solidarity with Palestine this Sunday.
With the most devastating attack ever launched on the people of Gaza, it's time for all of us to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people.
Israel has waged war on the Palestinians for the last 75 years. The Nakba, ethnic cleansing, occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza.
We have to mobilise to show our support for Palestine. 12 p.m, State Library, this Sunday.
Rally to demand freedom and justice for Palestine.
Free Palestine Melbourne is a 3CR supporter.
Mandatory minimum sentences will not keep communities safe from acts of hate and racism, says the Human Rights Law Centre. We will bring you a final interview with Sarah Schwartz, a legal director in the Human Rights Law Centre's Democratic Freedoms team, which defends democratic rights and freedoms such as the right to protest, the rights of whistleblowers and rights to participate in public affairs. It is deeply concerning that the Albanese Government is imposing mandatory minimum sentences which will lead to politicians instead of courts deciding on punishments and will disproportionately impact marginalised groups of people. And we will discuss with Sarah the mandatory minimum sentences and look at the media release in detail and also the submission as well in just very briefly. And I believe I have had the pleasure of interviewing Sarah before in her capacity in the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service, but we'll soon find out. Hi Sarah, welcome to the program.
Hi, Marisa. Thanks so much for having me.
Lovely to have you. Now, I took a bit of liberty there. You were with the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service, weren't you? No?
I was until a couple of months ago when I moved over to the Human Rights Law Centre.
Indeed, and congratulations on your role, Sarah.
Thank you.
And it's just, we did speak about deaths in custody, but before that, but we're going to be speaking now about a very important topic. Would you be able to just tell us about what's been going on and give us some background?
Absolutely. And, this actually relates quite a bit to the work that we've spoken about previously in terms of criminalisation. Yeah. So the background to this is that the government has been consulting the community in terms of an amendment to the hate crimes bill, introducing new legislation to tackle hate speech and vilification at a federal level. The government did broad submissions across the community. Community organisations, including the Human Rights Law Centre, fed into that process and provided the government with feedback on new hate crimes legislation. And then at the very last minute, last week, with little to no notice, there was a proposal to introduce mandatory minimum sentences for certain hate crimes and terrorism offences. What that means, for example, is that for certain offences, such as the display of certain hate symbols or certain symbols that have been classified as related to terrorism, or for certain terrorism-related offences, people who are convicted of those offences, judges will be required to implement mandatory sentencing. Instead of what the normal process in the criminal legal system, which is that judges have a discretion about sentencing. And that discretion, as we know, is incredibly important. Instead, what these new laws mean is that judges will be required to send people to jail just by virtue of having committed the offences, no matter what the circumstances were. And, for a lot of people that we work with, the circumstances are incredibly important. And I can speak a bit more about why that's bad, but that's sort of the broader, this all came into play because of rising rates of racism in the community, and organisations like the Human Rights Law Centre have supported the need for there to be increased protections on marginalised and racialised groups, but there's no evidence that these mandatory minimum sentences, which just came into play, would have any impact on reducing hatred and discrimination.
So what would that mean in practice, say, could you give an example of how a community could be affected? Yeah, sure. So I guess one simple, one example might be that the display of certain symbols, like if a young person, for example, is to graffiti a symbol that is associated with hate crimes or terrorism, that individual, no matter what their circumstances are, no matter if they're from a particularly marginalised or vulnerable community, that individual will then, under these new laws, judges will be required to send that person to prison for a specific period of time that is mandated by those laws. And we know already, and that there are that police are more likely to target individuals from racialised groups, more likely to target First Nations people who are already more likely to be surveilled and policed. And it just means that those individuals who are more likely to be policed are now more likely to be sent to jail, because there's not even that step where a judge can look at their individual circumstances and say, well, this young person who displayed this symbol or who committed this particular offence, there are actually reasons why they committed this offence, and there might be reasons why they'd be better rehabilitated in the community rather than going to prison. There might be certain things that can be put in place to support this individual so that it doesn't happen again. Instead of all of that taking place, there's absolutely no discretion that can be applied, and judges are mandated to send that person to prison for 12 months. And we know already, and I'm sure your listeners know, that prisons are kind of the worst place to be in terms of being rehabilitated from anything. And, we know that that there are, in terms of being exposed to further violence, that is also incredibly likely to happen within a prison context. So you're having individuals
who are alleged to have committed, acts of hate and violence than being exposed to more violence and mandatorily so where there are other community solutions which tackle hate much better.
So I suppose I want to throw something out there and I want to see if this is actually relevant, but what about the fascist right-wing groups that are rising in Australia? How can we bring them to account?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and that's a really important thing for us all to be considering, because this is, part of the government's rationale for these types of laws. There is no evidence to suggest that mandatory sentencing, even for far-right actors, has any impact on those groups and their capacity to organise and recruit. There are community-based solutions which we know work far better at tackling the rise of the far right and fascism and neo-Nazi activities, and often those solutions look more like solutions at a community grassroots level, working individual communities, racialised groups working together to tackle these forms of racism, particular specific interventions that prevent people from entering these forms of violent extremism or being exposed to these types of ideologies, providing support to people who are at risk of being exposed to violent far-right ideologies like neo-Nazism. Those things all have a much better track record rather than law and order approaches. And we know this because we've also seen within, Victoria Police, for example, where I am, we've seen evidence of police officers applying different standards to far-right neo-Nazi protesters compared to other, people who are protesting for human rights. And I think that's really important. And the other thing that's really important to note is that protests which exist, which, I would classify all neo-Nazi protests as being protests which exist solely for the purpose of spreading hate, are not protected versions of speech or protest. They're not protected by human rights law. You're not. It's not a protected form of protest to be engaging in racial vilification.
Yeah.
And so police already have, in most cases, there are already laws that enable them to intervene and prevent these acts of hate from occurring. And sometimes what is happening is a lack of will or training on behalf of law enforcement to do this. But as I said, I think that once you hit the law enforcement stage, you're really too far along. And we need to be looking at solutions which are far more based in community itself to be preventing the rise of these sorts of groups.
The police do nothing anyway. They actually encourage the fascists in some ways. I've seen that a lot of protests.
I think we have seen examples in Victoria. There have been reports of Victoria Police members, not treating far-right protests or neo-Nazi protests as, or neo-Nazi organisers. I shouldn't say that they are protests, but, not treating them with the same, in the same way that they would treat other people who are committing other offences. And we also have seen in Victoria recently, I believe a Victoria Police member not be prosecuted for that type of offending. So there are, massive, and I think that this goes to the issue that you speak about all the time on this show, which is, systemic racism within Victoria Police. How can we expect an organisation which is so steeped in systemic racism to be at the forefront of tackling racism? I just don't think that we can.
I don't think we can either, and that brings me to my next question. How can we look at investigating and addressing the root causes of these incidents of racism?
I think that's a really broad question, and it's a structural question, right? In Australia more broadly, there is some guidance for governments on how to do this. The Australian Human Rights Commission has recently released its framework for addressing racism across different structures in society, and I think the government would do really well to look to that framework and to think about the ways in which different institutions are steeped in systemic racism and ensure that we're tackling racism as an interconnected issue that Australian Human Rights Commission report speaks about, the ways in which different forms of racism are both interconnected and distinct. And I think it's really important for us to recognise that and to recognise the way in which different systems and structures are steeped in racism. The Human Rights Law Centre also has, a suite of recommendations that we have been making in regard to addressing racism at sort of the legislative level. And they include things like strengthening Section 18C to prohibit offending, insulting or humiliating on the basis of race, religious belief, sexual orientation, gender identity and disability, consolidating our anti-discrimination laws to make sure that different groups and different marginalised groups are able to utilise our anti-discrimination laws to help them. And also, more broadly enacting an Australian Human Rights Act to ensure that each individual law and policy and service delivery agreement that the government puts into place is all grounded in human rights standards in a way that's really transparent and comprehensive. I think those are the sorts of legal remedies that our government should be looking at to tackling racism and ensuring that everyone, not just a select few, but everyone has the ability to be protected from acts of racism within society and acts of discrimination.
Exactly, and we need the Charter of Human Rights as well.
Exactly.
Interestingly, as you've been speaking, Sarah, I just got an email from a listener, Cheryl from Istra, who was telling me that Anne McAllister, who's a 3CR presenter, posted on Facebook that Debbie Morgan Freer, the Indigenous activist, was attacked yesterday by Zionists on her way to the rally. She's an Aboriginal activist. She did end up speaking in the end, but I think there was a scuffle before she arrived. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
It's pretty awful.
It's awful.
And I just thought I'd mention that, and I'm not expecting you to comment on it because I wanted to actually say this as soon as possible. We'll get more information before we look at that, but we were just talking about that. Attacked by a Zionist thugs on her way to the rally. I mean, what was that? It's really disgusting.
And this question that we have to ask is I think this goes to the heart. I obviously can't speak to the circumstances of what happened there, but this is why we need to be thinking of sort of these frameworks that mean that everyone is able to seek protection from racism, because certain peoples might not feel comfortable to rely on law enforcement to assist them, and law enforcement might not be the best solution to protect people from these acts. And so we really need to be looking beyond, I think, those measures.
And having long-term investment in strengthening community initiatives to address rising racism, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. The governments really want to, after an incident happens, they really want to sort of rush to make legislation to show that they're doing something. And I can, understand why they want to do that. But the reality is that, racism didn't just arrive overnight. Our country is founded in acts of racism. We need to be engaging in that long-term investment.
And what about a uniform Anti-Discrimination Act to consolidate federal anti-discrimination laws into a single, uniform and modern act? Is that something that was recommended in the submission?
That was something that we recommended in our submission, yes. Currently, we have really piecemeal anti-discrimination laws across the country. They're piecemeal state-based laws, they're piecemeal federal laws protecting certain particular groups. And that means that not every group has the same level of protection. And so that's one thing that is really important for different groups, for there to be that consolidation effort.
So just to summarise, there is no evidence then that mandatory minimum sentencing does anything to reduce acts of hate, violence, racism or extremism?
No, we have no evidence for that at all.
It certainly doesn't make communities safer, does it? In fact, the Albanese Government has gone against its own party platform, hasn't it? And buckled, hasn't it?
Yes, they have. So its own party platform the Labor government's party platform says that they will not legislate mandatory minimum sentences because they know that this restricts the hands of judges to be making good law. It's not good for the rule of law. It's not good for judicial independence. It's essentially Parliament mandating and saying that a particular sentence needs to be implemented. And so that's why it's not part of their platform. They know that it can be, it can have really discriminatory and unjust impacts. Yet they have caved in this instance without any input really from the community.
And a particular concern is that judges are being forced to impose potentially inappropriately harsh sentences. And can you talk about how Australia would be in breach of Australia's obligations under international human rights law?
So there are a number of ways in which this could potentially have impact on Australia's obligations under international human rights law. So we have obligations to ensure that people are given a fair hearing and that there is, judicial independence. There's also people have a right not to be subjected to arbitrary punishment. And we can see that in certain cases, if judges are mandated to provide a particular sentence without considering someone's individual circumstances, that might be in breach of Australia's obligations under international law to protect those rights.
Absolutely. Sarah, thank you so much for coming onto the program. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we finish?
No, thanks so much for speaking to me, Marisa.
Lovely to have you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. And it's approximately 4:51, and you just heard an interview with Sarah Schwartz from the Human Rights Law Centre. And if you want to read more about the submission, just go to the website there. And I'm just going to put on another subscriber announcement. Listeners, in case people just tuned in, this is the Doin Time show and it's Subscriber Drive. And please subscribe by calling now 9419 8377 or subscribe online or come into the station at 21 Smith Street, Fitzroy.
Like so many community organisations, we need your continued financial support to keep 3CR on air and our community connected and strong.
Consider selecting Auto Renew for your subscription so your subscription keeps rolling on every year.
We love the security of knowing we have your support into the future.
Head to 3cr.org.au or call 9419 8377 and remember to select recurring for your annual subscription.
You might have heard about the Community Radio Plus app, but it's only when you start using it that you'll wonder how you lived without it.
You can listen to us wherever you are, at home, work, driving,
On public transport, gardening, protesting, or even in the bath.
Just search Community Radio Plus wherever you get your apps.
And you're back with the Doin Time show, and it's approximately 4:53 and we're nearing the end of our show. And I wanted to thank all our guests for coming onto the show today. Thank you to David and also to Trinity and to Sarah as well, and to discuss all these really interesting topics that make up Radical Radio at 3CR. And just wanted to remind listeners again that it is Subscriber Drive, in case people have just tuned in. And, yeah, the reason why specifically I think that people need to subscribe to the Doin Time show, we need to subscribe to all shows at 3CR, but ultimately the Doin Time show is a watchdog for police powers and also racism, and we really do a lot of coverage on women in prison and all prisoners really, and including people with disability and transgender, and of course our First Nations voices as well are paramount. So, yeah, we're nearing the end of our show, and we're going to be going out now pretty soon with our theme song, Black Fella, White Fella by the Rumpy Band. And stay tuned every Monday for the Doin Time show, and also, from 4 to 5 for the Doin Time show every Monday. And also listen back to the Invasion Day coverage, which has got a lot of stuff live from Camp Sovereignty. Invasion Day commentary and highlights. Listen back on the 3CR website. So it's goodbye from Marisa, and stay safe and take care of each other. The people united shall never be defeated. Bye.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast. If you found it valuable, please consider donating or subscribing to support independent community radio. To find out more, go to 3cr.org.au.